Thank you for coming back. So we are on Module 6, and it is here that we are going to do your evidence tables. So I'm here on Module 6 and in 6105 Canvas, and you have some very good information here in terms of your key ideas and your objectives and your readings. Your lead faculty has also given you some examples that are good that we'll go through. And then your assignment. So we're going to be doing 6A and 6B, and it's two different tables. And so I think I've said this before, but what you're doing in your assignment is different than what you're going to see in the journals, and there's lots of different reasons for that. So I want to review the information that you're required to give, and then we'll go look at some examples of what's in the literature. So I'm here on assignments, and I went down to here where it says example of assignment 6, and I clicked that. And so this is a very nice table where it has table 1, which is 6A, and table 2 is 6B. So I believe this chart or this table was made by our lead faculty, and the red here are hints to you. And so let's just go through it. So the table 1, 6A, are characteristics of studies that examine the relationship between A and B, your two variables. So just to give everybody a point of reference, you always start with the author and the date, and you don't have to list them all. Typically, you'll just list the first author date or first author et al. Date. You don't need to list all of them. For the purpose of the study, this is a simple copy and paste. So it's not considered plagiarism, but you do want to get their exact words, is why we do a copy and paste. So it says copy the researcher's words here. So I would just go look either in the introduction or the background. It'll some point say the purpose of this study was to blah, 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 copy and paste and put that there. Another thing just to keep in mind about these tables is that we try not to put as a lot of words as possible. So try your best not to have complete sentences or, when we go to talk about how many participants were in the study, we wouldn't say the number of subjects included was 455. It should just be N equals 455. So, here on the purpose of the study will be a complete sentence in the study. So then I usually typically just start with the word to. So you already have it where it says the purpose of the study, and then I just start here to examine differences between A and B or whatever it is. The research design, that is going to be anything. And so you know the difference between qualitative and quantitative. So there needs to be more information here than just quantitative or qualitative. So if it's quantitative, then you would put cross-sectional, randomized controlled trial, longitudinal, whatever it was. If it's qualitative, usually they'll say it was a phenomenological approach or ethnographic approach or whatever it is, whatever information they give you that can give people a hint on exactly what kind of quantitative or qualitative study it was is helpful and should go there. The characteristics of the sample and setting. So this is important for people to really get an idea of who was in your study or who was in all of these studies. So how the sample was obtained. So you can include that or not. It kind of depends on what you need to do. So if it's a randomized controlled trial, for example, then you know that the sample was obtained randomly. But for sure, we need to put number of subjects. So that needs to be N equals 55. The gender. And sometimes if it's important to you, then you can say, 50% were male, 50 were female, or 80% were male, 80 female, or 20 female, whatever it is. The age, I typically give a range and a mean, and then the setting if applicable. So you really need to think a little bit about these characteristics because there may be something extra that you want to put in there that you think is important. And that's going to be different from every person to every person. So then we move on here to variable 1. And so let's just give the example of loneliness. So then definition. So you can copy and paste their definition of loneliness here, or your variable. And then how did they measure it? So then you would put, so we use the revised UCLA loneliness scale. So that's what I would put, our UCLA loneliness scale. Or some other people just simply ask a yes or no question, are you lonely? So then write that there so that people know how this was measured. And then variable 2, same thing. How are they defining cognitive function? Write that sentence here. And then how is it measured? So it's same thing. It's most likely going to be some sort of scale or some sort of question or some sort of data, maybe number of falls or number of missed days. So that just needs to go there. And then 6B. So this is just kind of your preliminary basic information that gives you a pretty good idea of what was going on. Then your table 2 is 6B, and that's the result of research on the relationship between blank and blank. So data on variable 1. So for the example here, I would put something like, let's just say, so I was doing loneliness was my variable 1. So the mean score on the RUCLA loneliness scale was 55. And so then that just says, this is what the overall was. It just gives them some sort of idea. You could put the range, the mean was 55, but the range was 22 to 75. So whatever information that you have on that variable should go there. Same thing for data on variable 2. It's kind of what are the results just from that measurement. If it was a yes and no question, are they lonely? Then you could write, 55% answered yes and 45% answered no. Whatever it was, just to give people an idea of what happened with that variable. Intervening or control variables, this may or may not be mentioned. If it is, then you can enter that there. So for me, sometimes they use the education level as a control when they're talking about cognitive function. So then if they did that, you just put education, level of education, whatever it is. And then findings on the relationship. So this is so important for people who are reading your article and they just want to come in and say, what happened? What happened with this one study? They might just read this one column. So then that's where you need to say what the findings were. And so that needs to be specific, whether it was significant or not. So then I would put the relationship between loneliness and cognitive function was not significant. And if that's the only thing, then that's fine. That's the only thing. Or if it was significant, then you should put that. The relationship between loneliness and cognitive function was significant. And also the direction. So if it's a positive correlation, then that means that both variables going in the same direction. So for mine, they were negative correlations. So that would mean that the higher loneliness, they had lower cognitive function. And that was a negative significant correlation. And you write the p-value. You really need to include that if it's significant because people want to see that. So then you would write p equals 0.001 or whatever they reported. Most of the time what we're going to see in these journals is that they have some sort of combination of both of these tables into one. So we just have it set up where it's table 1 and 2 for you because it's going to be easier for you to really look at everything. So then this is the one example. So the first example is there tables that looked at relationships between variables. And then this other example is intervention. So if you're actually looking at interventions and the findings or the outcomes from the intervention, it looks a little bit different. Same thing though, author, purpose, study design, sample location, setting, so description of intervention. So then you're going to want to know, you want to look very quickly to see on this table, what are all the different types of interventions that were done for these 5 studies or however many you included. So then you should say participants met once a week for 8 weeks for 1 hour each. It says here who delivered the intervention. So was that the researchers or was it a licensed therapist? Who did it? Makes a difference. And then outcome definition and how measured. So it just says patients, an example is patients, description of their pain measured on a 1 to 10 scale. So it's the same thing. How was it measured? Then for table 2 for this one, very similar, restate the outcome, data on outcome prior to intervention, data after, and findings. So a lot of times they're going to measure loneliness before the intervention and after the intervention. So that's what they're asking for here. What was the score? What was the mean score for loneliness before the intervention? Write it there. And then what was it after? And then the finding is it significant or not? And that's really what people want to know. Was it significant, which means that they'll report P less than or equal to 0.05 or not. If it wasn't significant, then there is no difference. The intervention didn't work. So let's look at some examples. This example is from this study we've been looking at that you have as an example, the school-based asthma education program on missed number of days of school, ER visits. So they start here. It looks very similar, and this is one that has an intervention, so they have the purpose. And again, it's not a complete sentence. They just provide adolescents with the knowledge and skills, and they go on. The design sample setting is here in 1, so pre-test, post-test, 108 students, 11 to 15 years old with asthma. So I personally, as faculty, and when I do this, would rather see that instead of these with this slash in between it, just start a new line. So pre-test, post-test, start a new line that says N equals 108 students. I think it's easier for people just to glance and read it versus reading all these paragraphs. Description of intervention. So here's when they said they had classroom facilitators provided 3 90-minute or 6 45 minutes of lecture, discussion, group work, demo, problem. Then here where it says content, I would start a new line there too, just so that it's easier to read. And so then they talk about the intervention. The measurement of outcomes. So the students completed a self-report questionnaire. That was pre-intervention, immediately post, in 6 months. And the number of school days and ED visits were measured. So that gives people an idea of what and how they measured the outcomes, and then the findings. So this is similar to what you had in the other 2 where they start to just give basic data on the outcomes. So 17% had absences due to asthma more than one time. 46% had one or more asthma episodes that required ED visit. That was pre-test. Post-test, then 8% had absences on tardiness, and 34% had 1 or more asthma episodes. So then what does this mean? Right here, it's summed up. The differences showed substantial improvement after intervention. So my only question is, I don't know if that was significant or not. It would be good, they can show substantial improvement without being significant, but was it substantial improvement that was significant? That's the only thing missing here. But they do have it right here in this next one, the next article they're summarizing here, statistically significant change in intervention group, okay? P-value for change in days of school miss was less than 0.05, and the p-value for ED visits was less than 0.01. So that is a significant difference. So according to those findings, this intervention, the Roaring Adventures of Puff, made a significant difference between the intervention and the control group. So I think this is the study you'll have. Yeah, this is the one that we've been looking at. Let me show you now mine, because we're already at 14 minutes. Let's look at loneliness and cognitive function. So this is my study. And so you can see it looks similar to what we just saw. And so this one, I was looking at a relationship, so not intervention. So same thing, author and year, purpose and design. And you can see how I have to examine correlates on low performance. And then cross-sectional was the design. So I combine those. The sample and setting characteristics are N equals 13,000. They were males and females. Their age was greater than 65 years. They were all community dwelling, and they were from Canada. Loneliness measurement. One question on a 3-point Likert scale of how often they lacked companionship, felt left out, or isolated. How did they measure cognitive domain? So 2 tasks of immediate delayed recall of word lists, and that measured short-term verbal memory, verbal learning, and post-inference recall. So then I just went down, and for every cognitive measure that they had, I just listed the name of it and what it was for. So this Moray House test number 12 is for verbal reasoning. Right here, it says additional tests of reaction time and inspection time. So sometimes they'll do measures that they just kind of come up with on their own, or if there's, a list of 20 of them, I wouldn't necessarily list all 20 of them. You can just put that they used a bunch of more tests, and then the person can go back to the article to look at that. So then here are the results. It's very simple. Loneliness was negatively correlated with worse performance in first recall, executive function, semantic fluency, and processing speed. All P were less than 0.01. So that summarizes everything. For someone who's reading this, your reader, that might be all that they need to know. Was it correlated significantly or not, and how? And so make sure if it is significant that you include your statistics over here. If it's not significant, you don't need to. Loneliness was negatively correlated with general cognitive ability. So I have the statistics there, processing speed and memory. Sometimes you might want to put something else. So then when all variables were examined in separate ANCOVAs, lower loneliness was significantly correlated with better general cognitive abilities at age 70. So I'd have to go back at the article to see how that's important, but it must be something important that I wanted to say. So this video is already longer than I wanted it to be, 17 minutes. But so the whole point that the takeaway is that you need to go slow and really dissect these articles and pull out information that's important to you, that you think people are going to want to know specifically about your specific variables. And this is going to look different between you and your buddy. Your buddy does one on stress and I do it on loneliness, and there might be a little bit variation on what we think is important for each one. So think about it, talk to your faculty, and pull it out. And then really the most important thing then, once you have this complete tables with this just dissected information, is that you can glance very quickly and see, there's 10 articles and all of them were significant, or all of them were not significant. So that's really the reason why you have this pulled out, because it's easier to see it in the columns when it's less words than when it's 5 or 10 different articles. It's really hard to synthesize it when it's all these words. So I think that's all I have to say about these. So if you have any questions or thoughts, ask your faculty and we'll be happy to get you where you need to go. Thank you.